Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 58th episode of the IWFM Navigating Turbulent Times webinar series. I don't really know where time's gone, but yes, we're nearly reaching episode 60, a nice rounded number, but today's episode 58. And as you can see on your screens there, we're talking about the introduction to smart buildings, and this will be with Elogbooks and the IWFM Tech SIG. I just want to remind people this webinar is being recorded, and today's session is a panel debate where I would encourage from the outset, which I'm doing now, you, the audience, to participate in the questions, comments, and what you hear today. So if we just move on to the next screen, bit of a time delay, but we will get there. And there you are. Well, I can see the panel, the lovely panel. I'll get them to introduce themselves in a moment, but I'll be your host for today. I'm Peter Brogan, Head of Research and Insight at IWFM, and I welcome newbies to today's webinars and as existing people that's joined us on the previous 57 episodes of our series. So you've seen a familiar face on these episodes. But I just want to make people aware that we've got our partner, Elogbooks, and two representatives from there. On a guide that we've worked together, which, yes, is the benchmark about today's episode, an introduction to smart buildings. And within that guide, you're going to hear more today, but to give a quick summary of what you will find in that guidance that's being launched today is the definition of a smart building, the value of smart buildings, the factors driving smart building operations, which I think is fundamental, some examples of good smart applications, which is always good when people talk about, well, can we see some case studies? So that's integrated as well. The area about building strategy and how to create one, which again should be the link for anything we do moving forward, and the challenges of creating a smart building. And the reason why I flagged that nice and early is obviously today's foundations of today's panel debate has got representation from Elogbooks, from our Tech SIG, and 4D monitoring that all were heavily involved in that guidance. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper into those discussion points around the guide, but that is available on our website. And just to remind viewers, listeners of our partnership with Elogbooks, there is a guide currently available also that was launched about IWFM compliance. So I just want to make people aware there is something tangible apart from this webinar to go back to and reference. So if we just go back to the next screen, just to remind people of the panel, including myself, to ensure I get everyone's name right. Before we go into the panel, of course, I want the audience to be aware who's on the panel today. So I will go in running order as you see it. So Barry Jones, Managing Director of 4D Monitoring Limited. If you could just do an introduction to the audience and just a bit of background about why smart buildings is important to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Peter. Yeah, I mean, as you said, my name is Barry Jones, Managing Director of 4D Monitoring. I started this venture probably about 6 years ago and decided there's a need for, smart applications to be included in buildings. Prior to that, my engagement was with a national maintenance provider that specialized in building maintenance for properties. And I was involved with that particular industry for 15 years and basically taken a lot of those learning points from that business and applied it into our smart development of new technologies within 4D monitoring to address some of the issues that we came across during our venture through working in maintenance. Thank you.
No, thank you, Barry. So yeah, you'll be hearing lots more from Barry as we go into our panel debate and questions. Moving along nicely, we've got Gordon Mitchell, Digital Solutions Architect, Key Facilities Management and Keystone Workplace Software. And also, which is on the screen because we probably couldn't fit it, joking aside, he's also our chair of our Technology Special Interest Group. So hello, Gordon.
Hi everyone, nice to be here. Looking forward to the debate. As Peter says, I've got my industry positions on the screen, but I think today's more around my technology special interest group role, and certainly looking to bring some of the other work going on in the UK and internationally in this smart building space.
No, thank you, Gordon. And I should also add the author of the guidance that I referred to earlier. That is the foundations of today's panel. So thank you, Gordon. Last but not least, I'd like to introduce John Wills, Product Director at our partner Elogbooks, on the guidance that I shared earlier. So good afternoon, morning, wherever you are, Gordon, but it's good afternoon in the UK. So John even. So good afternoon, John.
Good afternoon. And it's been a pleasure to support you guys with both of the guidance documents. And so I'm John. I'm the product director at Elogbooks. I've been in and out of plant rooms since I was knee high. I spent a bit of time working as a building controls engineer and fault finding BMS systems. Also trying to lobby manufacturers to improve their equipment by putting sensors in them. So I feel like I've been pushing towards smart buildings most of my life. I spent a bit of time working in innovation and technology at Savills, and now I am heading up the product development and innovation for Elogbooks and the software solutions that we provide there.
Thank you, John. And thank you, Barry, Gordon, John, just giving an introduction to the audience of who they'll be hearing from today. So I'd just like to just go straight into the panel debate. Also, from that perspective, I really want to encourage the listener viewers once again to get involved in this. Send your questions through, send any comments from what you hear today in terms of what you hear from John, Gordon, Barry, and myself respectively, if that's okay. So I like to just go straight into the debate, if that's okay, chaps, in terms of, we mentioned about the guidance and some of the areas it covers, and very much it's an introduction to smart buildings. But if we actually kick off with this question in terms of, if you had to explain it, what are the greatest opportunities from the use of smart technology in the workplace? If you still have the skeptics out there, how do you convince people about this term smart buildings and its actual opportunities? So I'm opening it to the floor. So who wants to kick off on that one?
I'll jump in there. I don't think it's a black and white thing at the moment. What a smart building is. I think, buildings, and we highlight this in the document, Gordon's work, is that there is a scale of dumb to smart in buildings, and this beautiful future of buildings that are cognitive. I think that anywhere where software is used to automate process, where communications or buildings are able to sort of adjust to fall outside of what would be a normal template building operation condition to meet the occupant, all lends itself to being described as smart. And the opportunities that arise out of that are personalization, people being able to get a more personalized experience within a building, whether that's the space or the conditions, and an effective reduced cost and reduction in waste. And I think those are the two key things that we're sort of looking towards.
So Gordon,
from my perspective,
go on, Barry. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, from my perspective, we've with our experience, we've looked into this, and connecting buildings with technology and providing intuitive data insights can obviously lead towards better outputs from properties, in particular around the services that run within these buildings, and just generally making buildings more sustainable by putting in place governance tools. And with the technologies that are available in this day and age, we've got some very inexpensive and easy to apply type sensor technologies that are sometimes wireless and can be easily applied into properties. And obviously these insights, a lot of building systems do have building management systems that are time clocks for properties, but a lot of these systems may have been designed way back in the day, and the building use case may have changed. So, we can provide governance tools to make sure that systems are running in line with occupancy in particular. And, in the commercial sector, we know that there's lots of opportunities to save on energy. In particular, a lot of the older buildings aren't necessarily running as well as they could. And, we've had use cases where we see buildings running 24/7. So, I think there's lots of opportunities there to try and address some of these problems, and putting in sometimes a simple retrofit application can certainly give the building users, occupiers, the information that they may need to make intuitive decisions going forward.
No, that's great. And I think at the heart of this is better decision making when we talk about smart buildings and the usage of data. I think that's going to follow on some questions. So you'd be pleased to know, panel, we're getting some questions firing in already. But Gordon, I'd like to bring you in, which is probably a follow-up to what John and Barry's mentioned there in terms of how do you get started with all this? At the end of the day, the guidance is out there. We've got experience on this panel that's been in this world for a number of years, and I mean that respectively. But if you've got someone out there, the guidance will help. Another unsubtle plug for the guidance. But how do you get started with all this when we talk about smart buildings and infrastructure and sensors? Is there any best practice? Can we have your thoughts on that?
Well, I think thanks, Peter, first. I think as you're seeing with this guidance, the whole environment's emerging. And in that, there's not a playbook or one path to follow. So I think in a lot of ways, as Barry just alluded to, is the entry point economically isn't very high. But to get on the smart journey, I think the best starting point is almost Smart FM. One of the most kind of novel projects that I seen in terms of return on investment was with very cheap CO2 sensors, a couple of £100. But the Smart FM was able to, didn't do any analytics, just had a very simple push function that when the CO2 went above a certain tolerance, they basically got an alert on their smartphone. So there was no deep analytical information, no AI, but the Smart FM moved forward significantly with a few £100 ultimately of investment. But the implications on the workplace was every meeting room now was able to get that extra FM service, which in this particular site was opening a window. So the technical resolve wasn't too high end, but the Smart FM enabled really the full potential of the technology to be realized in a very, very small proof of concept. And I can tell you in that particular instance, when the next more impressive or further reaching project was put in front of the CFO, the success of the first project played into that, and that started this continuous improvement cycle. So I would say, you know, keep it simple, do something that you can predict and sort of de-risk, but the opportunities are there right now, and that's where companies like Elogbooks and 4D monitoring, with their knowledge and experience, maybe the FM just needs to connect with the right partner and not try and sort of do the whole thing themselves. And in that partnership, innovation and optimization is rife for sure.
So linking with the guidance then, panel, in terms of we talk about the definition of smart building, but we talk about the value of smart buildings, and this is picking up on some of the questions coming through. And Gordon, you referred to some costs there. What is the value of smart buildings? If you had to simply ask, what is the true value of smart buildings? I think we're getting a lot of questions already about return on investment. I'd like to go on to that question later, but what is the true value of smart buildings if you had to summarize it?
I think you've got a really distributed value chain here. There's so many stakeholders in a property. You've got tenants, you've got landlord owners, you've got the managing agents, you've got the people that are working there. So there's value throughout the chain to those different people. I think if you look at what's driving this, the sustainability agenda, regardless, we have to get to a point where we're meeting targets. So regardless of the value, there's steps that need to be taken, and introducing some cheap technology to make sure you're not wasting stuff is a good start. I think there's proven value in some of the business models that have come out of smart buildings. So OVG Real Estate rebranded as Edge, and they've been shown that retrofitting buildings with a smart brand and some smart tech can really improve the value of it. And I think you've got other business models more aligned with space as a service, where using not necessarily the traditional sensing smart technologies, but apps for meeting space and workspace booking. They've shown that they can increase the density of a floor plate to up the value of the space that they're renting out, and that in itself has driven value. So there's different values that can be extracted through different use cases to different people in the food chain. And I think, going back to the question about where you start, you really need to look at the value to the people that you're trying to provide value to, and start from there.
No, thank you, John. And I think that's the not the trouble, but probably the challenge of the multiple stakeholders involved, and that whole management of what value is perceived to each of those stakeholders. Is there anything you'd like to add on that, Gordon or Barry, as I move, as promised, into the questions firing in from the audience?
I've got just a short point, and it kind of brings in what Barry and John said in the initial question. Barry said around connectivity, and John said experience, and I think this, what a smart building provides the FM, is through that entire value chain, all of those stakeholders, an ability to get more connected to that experience. And that's not prescribing how you then want to evolve your FM discipline, but what it's doing is giving you understanding of what you're working with, and with that knowledge you should be able to, adapt your proposition to a more enhanced experience for all stakeholder groups. Knowledge is power.
No, definitely. And I'm, as promised, going to go to questions. So we've had a question in from Philip Thomas. Thank you, Philip, for the question. It does correlate with the guide as we've jumped into the value of smart buildings, and then we're going to talk about the factors driving smart building operations. But in Philip's words, he wants to go back to basics. What's the definition of smart building? What is the ultimate objective? I.e., is it cost savings, customer experience, sustainability, or all of the above? So I don't know who wants to take that. I appreciate in some of our answers we've touched upon that, but the definition of smart building, what really is its objective?
We see in the industry many different questions like that coming in, and I think there's an eagerness out there for companies to get onto this smart buildings application type solution, but there is a lack of knowledge, and sometimes it does come out like some of our clients in particular will be energy focused, often wanting to know how property portfolios or properties are running in respect of services that are sitting in these properties. Room utilization, building utilization may be another use case. We have seen a lot of clients focus predominantly around the energy saving piece and trying to maintain and look at their budgets around energy utilization in particular. And, in that respect, there's been a lot of quick wins, certainly around properties that may not demand 24/7 operation, for instance, and, where plant and equipment may not be running as efficiently as it could. If we talk about ROI, sometimes where we do find sites that are running with plant 24/7 operation, we've got to think about the life cycle of equipment as well. So, there's so many things. And I think, going back to your question, it's all of the above, really. It just depends on each client's requirement, really.
No, yeah, I guess that's the beauty of this, that bit like stakeholders, clients are going to have certain needs as well.
I think I'd like to reiterate that it's not black and white, that smart building isn't easy to define. I think, there's actually inherent danger in trying to use smart building as a solve-all, because there's a wrapper here for hundreds of different problems solved through many different uses and applications, with things connecting together. So, there's not a single thing that's gonna happen here. It is very bespoke to people's individual requirements. And there are black and white use cases. So if you've got a high voltage room that's in a basement that floods regularly, one single sensor that will tell you when the water level is rising to a point where you're about to have hundreds of £1,000s of damage is obvious. It's like that's a no-brainer. But that's that's just one tiny little element of a package of things that are smart building related. It might be that you've got a multi-tenanted building where you want to provide some kind of extra amenity, through a community engagement app, or the ability to book the facilities in the building, which would be an application of smart building that works for you. And then if your start point is constructing an entirely new portfolio of buildings, your start point and what smart buildings to you is going to be entirely different again, because then the world's your oyster. You can really get creative with what you're thinking and what you want to put in. So I think it's difficult to define it as a single thing.
Yeah, and John, to John's points there as well, we've also seen use cases where clients are looking for more proactive approaches to dealing with maintenance and compliance monitoring. In some respects, there's some properties where a simple sensor can be helping with compliance related matters, whether that be around Legionella monitoring, for instance. So there's many different applications.
No,
I think
go on.
if just a quick add on to that is, I think if you look in the guidance, we talk about this roadmap through smart to cognitive. If you take cognitive buildings as a autonomous entity, so it's fully technologically functioning, which may seem quite a while away yet, then if I could bring an abridged term to the question, then I would almost say a smart building's an amplifier of FM capability. So like John said, there's different entry points and different use cases, but if you actually look, the smart building isn't necessarily delivering the exercise for you, it's amplifying the FM capability. And just like any smart building can ultimately be at different maturity states or capability states, so can an FM team. So a really digitally immature FM team with the best smart kit in the world may not deliver the return of investment that you would be looking for. But again, going back to my other example, a really smart FM team with then just enough right tools and the support partners to work with can transform the way the workplace, is experienced.
No, thank you. And I just want to remind listeners, viewers, I am promising to go through your questions as we go along. We have got a Q&A section, but what you hear, please engage with the questions. If you've got a comment, please comment back. Want you to be part of this discussion as much as possible. So please encourage you to use that function. We've had a couple of questions, and I mentioned the word return on investment. And I know, John, you politely mentioned the Edge building in Amsterdam that's been proclaimed as one of the smartest buildings in the world, if not the world. Quite a difficult question to answer, but I guess, is there any case studies or cases that stand out? Basically, who is doing this well already? And I think this just echoes some of the comments we're getting through. So maybe not necessarily naming names, but is there many examples out there that people are getting this right? Or is it as simple as that?
I don't want to put the Edge building was so long ago now. The company got rebranded, and they've since, done other projects which they've flipped and sold successfully for additional value. But putting a little bit of a taint on that, they're also handing over buildings to operators that don't have in-house Microsoft developers and engineers that can work with the technologies they put in. So they inherently increase the life cycle costs because of the skills that they need to bring in. So it's it swings and roundabouts. It's been successful for them, but maybe not so much for the people that are taking on the buildings afterwards. Apologies, completely lost track of that original question there then. No,
sorry, it was with whether there was any good examples there beyond the Edge.
We put a case study into the guidance around some of the stuff that Barry's been doing with 4D. So maybe that's one that you want to take on, Barry.
Yeah, sure. I'll talk about a few examples. For one of our experiences from a case study was a property in London. I think it was a 60,000 square foot property. And the customer spent in the region of about £3,000 on a particular application. And, because we were able to highlight many problems in this particular environment, they had cooling towers, they had pumps, they had chillers, they had boilers, you name it, and ventilation plant. This particular system was run on a BMS, or these systems were run on a BMS platform, and the BMS platform wasn't running properly. It was nobody's fault. I think, the important thing to stress here is that sometimes, because there is a lack of visibility, people cannot actually diagnose faults and where potential issues like 24/7 operation may be occurring. Equipment does go faulty, a sensor could go faulty, etc. That particular customer had a return on investment of £10,000 a month. Another example is another property in London, and this specifically refers to an air handling supply unit. This particular property had an AHU, or air handling unit, that wasn't running correctly. It had an inverter drive, so it's got the system to ramp up, ramp down the air fan speed, and it had developed a problem of some sort where effectively it was running 100% on fan speed and not shutting down at night for an office environment. And in that particular use case, we saw a return of investment of £18,000 just in 1 year on one asset. So, it can be quite phenomenal. In our other experiences, and, as per the guidance, there's an example in there. We've seen portfolios with an ROI on utility cost savings between 5 and 36%. So it can be, different on different properties, and depending on what kind of equipment's installed in these properties. Certainly those buildings that have big central plant type applications can sometimes have significant savings to be had.
No, thank you, Barry. And there's some quite powerful numbers there that will make people sit up and take notice. And as you mentioned, there is a case studies in the guidance itself. So there is some logic to this webinar as host. We talked about the definition of smart building, the value of smart buildings. I want to move on to the third tier that's in the guidance. It talks about the adoption. So from your experience, panelists, I guess, what are the biggest challenges in terms of adoption? And again, a very open question, because there's a plural of challenges. So I'll be intrigued to know what are those challenges in terms of adoption, and how do you overcome them, more importantly?
In big change, I would say one word: culture. Honestly, it's as much about getting, as I think the challenge of digital transformation, which is in essence what we're talking about, because those stakeholders are so disparate and extend across so much of the operational needs, getting that alignment and then the kind of platform to actually go through a whole change program, because no matter what you start with first on that smart journey, it's not going to be the end. So to me, that's absolutely, if you can get that right and get that alignment, then smart digital transformation is the gift that keeps on giving. It helps you with sustainability, social, economic, across the whole, what you would call as value for the organization. But if you don't get that alignment right at the beginning, then it can be a very painful experience for all involved.
Anything to add, Barry, John, on that, about the adoption and the challenges?
I think people, it's difficult to know. So the value chain is one of the key ones. I think, someone has to put their hand in their pocket. I think some people will probably have gone out to their existing BMS provider and had an eye-watering 6-figure quote, and then got turned off of it for life. The expense doesn't have to be that high. There are lower entry points with retrofit solutions, but I think also then who's getting the value, who's paying for it. I think FMs in general have the opportunity to be real advocates for building occupiers and tenants. I think the people that use buildings have for forever and a day been left out of the real consideration when it comes to the construction and design of buildings. Things get missed out. I know from my experience of maintaining equipment in buildings, you're often fighting against the design and thinking, God, there was a real opportunity for improvement here. So I think the adoption, yes. Culture change, definitely. Changing the way that we measure, the way that we assess things like maintenance, the the culture of becoming more of an advocate for the occupiers of the building, and thinking about what's going to help them, what they need. I think those things will all help adoption. There's not a lack of technology. The people say the property industry, is it not innovating? It is. There's so much technology out there. It's definitely the adoption that slows it up.
Yeah, thank you, John. And Barry, anything to add from your experience about that dreaded word adoption and the barriers?
Adoption can be tricky. It's who are we speaking to? It may be that in my case we'll present to a board at director level, and this is brilliant, let's roll this out across multiple properties. And then you'll speak to a building manager, and perhaps they won't be as engaging because it's coming from the top down. We need to try and get across the whole spectrum here of on the communication side. It's important that we one thing we're doing is we're investing in CPD courses to build an awareness around smart buildings in particular. Obviously this guidance as well as part of that strategy and process. There's so many areas that we need to focus, even to the level of service providers that are maintaining properties, getting their buy-in. Sometimes, when we come across property maintenance in particular, we'll see that, there's a fixed contract in place, and it doesn't really allow for extra checks to be done in terms of, smart building type solutions having to now be monitored as an additional service. So, there's a massive change needed in the industry, and we are trying to chip away at making people aware of the opportunities along the way, and with fantastic case studies, being able to present ROI, and whether it be for compliance monitoring, it definitely has a very good opportunity to help people across the board.
I often wonder, and this might be something that Gordon can comment on, is whether there's this sort of great white whale hunt with smart buildings. People see this really clever stuff out there, and they think that the starting point should be that their building completely autonomously diagnoses and repairs itself. And I think there maybe it feels a bit out of reach, a bit unachievable for some people. I think maybe they think my building's just not that clever, and it's just not going to be possible for me to do anything with it, and therefore they're disincentivized to start in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, for
John,
me,
we come across people. Sorry.
No, I was just going to refer back to our earlier conversation. I think that's one of the kind of most potent aspects to what yourselves work on is retrofit. It's this smart journey when you see the front page magazine, global brand headquarter building, millions of pounds of investment, it can seem completely unattainable. But you mentioned a few moments ago the entry point of your initial project. I made a comment earlier on to the same ilk. Retrofit doesn't need to be remortgage the entire business's estates to get on that journey. And the thing about all of this innovation is, if you get it right, it does deliver a return. And from that return, there's a snowball effect. If you keep getting it right, then that's where transformation happens.
Yeah, I was going to say that we've come across clients that have looked at sustainability for properties in particular, put some solar panels in, and they've done what they think is right. But then when we all apply an example of a 4D monitoring retrofit application, we're still making that example I mentioned earlier, an £18,000 saving because one asset isn't running correctly. I think there's a bit of a wow factor with that, and I think there's definitely opportunity to try and get more case studies available for people to be able to make that decision process a bit easier for them, but really identifying outputs and requirements for those smart building solutions. Let's sometimes just focus on keeping it simple, as you say, Gordon.
No, thank you. And I think from that, keeping it simple is probably the art in this to make it, to get through that adoption and some of those preconceived barriers that might have to be myth busters when people are talking about smart buildings and technology in particular. Now, John, you mentioned earlier, and you touched upon it briefly in the politest sense, about the role of FM and workplace in this smart tech world. And there's a couple of questions coming in from the audience who are still encouraged to bring your questions, comments forward about what is the role of workplace and facilities within this smart tech world. So how is that evolving? Is it evolving? So Gordon, I'm going directly to you from your experience day to day, but also with some of your other work with the SIG and international standards, just to name some of your other activities. But what is the role for workplace and FM? Obviously, from an IWFM perspective, that's our membership, that's who we represent. So what is their role in this smart tech world that we're touching upon today?
I think the reality is, without the tech, you are separate from the workplace. What the technology does is allows the FM to get intimate with the real-time workplace. I think for all of us, particularly with the likes of the pandemic, none of us want the FMs sitting on our shoulder all day observing what we do. That's not an appeal, you know, never mind social distance and regulations and all of that. But what the technology provides is that continuous 24/7 awareness of how the workplace, as I said earlier on, experience is truly unfolding. And with that knowledge, that allows the FM to stop maybe taking complaints and reacting to that, but taking data and proactively evolving the workplace experience so the complaints never happen in the first place. So to me, it's eyes and ears and continuous awareness, which then again has to go to the right FM team to know what to do with that. But if those two worlds match, then you get workplace excellence, I would suggest.
John Barry, I guess from your experiences and vast experience in this area, I'm sure you've dealt with many workplace and FM professionals. What's your response to that question about their role?
We've been FM workplace professionals. I don't expect FMs to suddenly upskill and become data analysts overnight. And I think, you know, there's no expectation that this is going to be something that they have to steer and guide. But I think they should be advocates for the people in the workplaces, whether they're the tenants, whether they're employees of their own company, you know, whoever they are nominated to represent. I think what Gordon said is very poignant. This is about getting closer to them and being able to focus more on that relationship, you know, steering what they need out of the building, rather than reacting to things when they've gone wrong. You know, very, very simply, you know, hot and cold requests. You know, why should we need the tenants to pick up the phone and report that it's been hot for the last 3 hours? That's something that's easily detectable and prompted. You know, to fire a request straight across to the FM delivery team to make an adjustment before it's a problem is something that we should have been doing 20 years ago. But we still haven't got the hang of it.
No, I think
you're actually right, John. And you know, from our perspective, you know, your motor vehicle that you climb into every day can tell you if something goes wrong. Buildings should be doing the same. There's no two ways about it. Making data intuitive, you know, I did mention this earlier. It will help the FM, and providing governance tools in particular. You know, we see that there'll be an FM maintenance company type meeting in place, having information readily available through these sensor solutions can often help with the decision-making process and takes out the hearsay factor. You know, we can see that this particular hot water circuit is running below 50 degrees. That's a risk. Let's do something about it because we've actually got the data. And like John says, putting the automation and alerting process into the equation can help with that proactive approach.
I also think FMs are going to be really key in the drive to get people back into the workplace post-pandemic. People need to feel safe where they're working. People need to be incentivized to get there, to go there, to be with each other, and FMs play a huge role in that. And smart buildings has a lot to offer to help in that area as well. So I think as part of that core responsibility, engaging with people who understand this stuff to help guide them through some of the applications that work for them would be a really smart start. Just begin that learning curve. And ultimately, you don't want to end up in some kind of crazy technology vanity project where you've got tech for tech's sake. And really the FM is going to be the person that's going to be able to advocate for the people in the workplace and say, no, that's not what we need. This is what we need, and this is what's going to make a difference.
Yeah, and from our audience figures, there's people on here that are crying out for that support to make the difference, and hopefully that guidance is in one step on that journey. You mentioned the word, not picking on you, Barry, a few times, data, and it's a nice segue into the next question about something the technology SIG. You're fully aware Gordon's produced guidance from the Institute around building information modelling, and also following on that, digital twins. I guess from that perspective, how would the role of BIM and digital twins help this agenda around smart buildings? So that's a couple of questions that have actually come in from the audience about the role of BIM and digital twins. So I know this is about smart buildings, but heavily those concepts have a massive bearing to play on smart buildings. So who wants to take the hot seat in terms of the debate about BIM and digital twins?
I think Gordon's fresh off the session on that one. It's probably best to go.
There you go, Gordon. Over to you.
Yeah, I think there's two parts. Is obviously what we're talking about in smart buildings is a lot of data. Now, data without context is just clogging up databases. So what BIM is starting to do on one hand is bring the whole built environment into a digital context. So any of us that have been in this space, 5-10 years ago, yes, we've had, BMSs for decades working with data, but really it's only as of late where the affordability and the accessibilities come on that all of these options have started to I guess, blossom, and therefore demanded the need for some kind of structure. And I think BIM and digital twins is ultimately growing and bringing us, whether it's 3D graphical rendering of that data or simulations or whatever the case might be. On the flip side of that, what I think it's also providing is a mandate, and in that mandate you're now seeing contracts reflective of the requirement to be compliant to some of these levels. So in that way, you're also forcing the sector to follow the money, in essence, and make sure if you want to deliver an NHS portfolio or a schools, whatever the case might be, then if you're not digitally capable, you're not going to be entertained. So I think in both those ways, it's sort of forcing progress from the bottom up in terms of the FM capability and the ability to influence that change and affect that experience. But top down, it's, I guess, giving the sector something that it can lean on to more slowly kind of evolve the utilization of these digital landscapes.
Anything to add, Barry, John, on the BIM digital twins debate?
So, it's by the time we get to 2030, even 2050, I think we're going to have to accept the fact that most buildings probably won't have, level 4, level 8, level 12, whatever, level BIM we're up to by that point in time. I think that, a retrofit digital twin option and something that gets us close to that would be, bloody fantastic. And that's what we're hoping to attain. With regards to data, I think what data gives you, Gordon used the word context, I think it's perspective. When you look at something that's been presented to you by the data that's been analyzed across 1,000 buildings, what it should tell you is how your situation compares to everything else. And I think that is something that we've developed through data being available through the cloud. And I think that further standardization, further integration, more data will further that perspective on the things that you're looking at. So it won't be a case of going out and saying, right, need to try and find something cheaper 3 times over to make sure I've got the cheapest price. It will be I can compare what that cost looks like over the life cycle of my building because I compare it to the thousands of others that exist there as well. I think digital twin, as an extension of BIM, they're kind of a similar thing for me. Gives us that opportunity for the lifetime commissioning of a building. When buildings are built, they're open plan. They may not have been purpose built for the people that are actually going to end up in there. And certainly, I've seen through my career as an engineer, some really crazily divided floor plates to squeeze as many people in as possible, but the actual building itself never gets reconfigured or recommissioned to be optimal for those kinds of conditions. So I think digital twin as a concept is going to give us the ability to make sure that more buildings are consistently updated throughout their life cycle to make sure that conditions and the parameters are optimal for the way it's laid out. And I think what I would like to see, having been in the room with, as an FM professional with architects designing stuff, is a close of this loop between the people that eventually use the building and the next design of the next building. And I think that the natural progression of BIM and digital twin is going to be finally some kind of useful output that can be fed back into the design and construction phase of a building to make sure that we're genuinely improving the stuff that we're building in the future and making it closer to what the people that are going to use it expect. So that for me is where that whole movement is hopefully headed.
No, thank you, John. And we've had some follow-up questions as you were speaking respectively there, Gordon and John, in respect to from an attendee saying, is there a way we can incorporate smart building technology into passive building design? Now, maybe explain what passive building design is, but is that at the heart of this?
I don't think it'd be possible to have a passive building without some kind of smart technology within it. I don't know, Gordon?
Well, I know there's an awful, particularly up here in Scotland, there's a big drive around passive buildings. So I think you're starting to see even legislation looking at embodied carbon. So when we start there's a kind of quantification of what's going on through that whole life cycle, and some of that's maybe a little analog still. But of course, again, it's going back to what we've said through this whole conversation. It's about that context, and then that context allows the FM to use experience and awareness and all these kind of things to bring that to evidenced life. Ultimately, two identical passive buildings at opposite ends of the country will perform differently. And if you don't have that technology, then you can take a manufacturer's guidance and do a lot of spreadsheet calculations, but it's a guess. So the technology gives you the facts, and I think in that, to validate passive building design, you would need to incorporate smart building technology.
I think it's a stop check as well. I mean, buildings can become really clever in their design and inherently complicated to operate, and the risk is that without the smart technology, that's highlighting areas that you might need to change, you run the risk of someone changing the building in a way that it's inherently more wrong than it would have been before, just because it's not obvious, there's not that visibility of it.
No, that's great. Sorry, I'm just looking at the different questions coming through. And as you can see, we've had it on the backdrop for quite a while, reminding people of the guide that's been launched today. But as promised, I've tried to build today's webinar delving deeper into the guide and taking questions in from the panel. But just to do a rounded piece on the guide, and it's one of the latter sections within the document, a couple of questions probably linking back to the earlier question, if you can remember, guys, in terms of how you get started, is why is a smart building strategy important and how do you create one? I know that is actually an area within the guide, so I could be flippant and say read the guide, but we've had a couple of questions in from that. If you had to summarize, why is strategy important and what's the best practice in creating one?
I mean, strategy, if you want to kind of get predictably to where you want to get to, then that's really what strategy is all about. We can all just react day upon day, but certainly this guide is, if you take that smart journey as a marathon, not a sprint, this guide's maybe your initial getting up to speed. But, as John mentioned earlier on, BIM's gone through various levels. It's not stopped either. So even the markers that we're trying to get to, those aspirational goals, just like the edge building, 10, 20 years from now will look antiquated. So inside here, you can start the journey, and from my point of view, what this would hopefully afford you is then you can reach out to Elogbooks or 4D monitoring partner, of your choice, and having a more informed conversation, because they can help you, but they can't do it for you. So this is very much, I think, that just getting to, as we've said, a simple starting point where you can start demonstrating return of investment and enhanced value. And but I think go into this not expecting a big bang, a one solution fixes all. It's an iterative, ongoing process.
No, I appreciate, Gordon, you talking about process. You need to drop off a little bit earlier. But as promised, I've taken questions throughout. If we just go onto the slide that's got Q&A, I have been tabling questions that come through from the audience, and we've had many. As you can imagine, we're nearly coming up to the hour. But I want to take this question that's coming from Terence. Firstly, panelist, he says, thanks for a good event. So we've got a happy viewer there. That's good to know. But what are your views, BIM and supply chain integrations? Do you think supply chain partners and facility services should interact with and feed data into our models? So before you go, Gordon, I don't know if you can comment on that.
Well, I think the term we would have in BIM is golden thread. The golden thread doesn't stop. The whole idea of it is it's a full life cycle thing. So if you're working with an extended supply chain, then your BIM efforts, if the golden thread gets cut all over the point where your engagement with your supply chain happens, then that's going to just contradict the purpose of trying to digitize in the first place. So I think it highlights one of the big challenges in us really, embracing is we all need to go on the journey. But yeah, I believe I can't see it. It's a bit like saying, can you do the passive houses without technology? Can you do digitization without your supply chain and partners? I would say no.
I think you've got to. The whole BIM model. I mean, if you've gone down in your BIM model to the detail of specifying, the exact type of actuator that's sitting on the side of a fan coil unit, it only takes one of your supply chain's operatives to walk in, replace that with a different part, and your BIM model's now invalid. So if you don't have them engaged and you don't have a tool with which you can engage with your supply partners, shameless plug, then it's going to be challenging. And you like I say, Gordon says, what's the point in spending all of that money if you're not going to engage them at the end of it, because that's where the savings is going to be made.
And talking about plugs, I'm moving into questions, and thank you for that, Gordon and John, respectively, as my screen jumps off the question. Sorry for the pause. Barry, this is for you. Can your products link into current BMS HVAC systems, and can 4D monitoring come on site to see what options are open to us in our building? That's coming from a viewer. So from that point of view, Barry, what's your comments on that question?
Yes to both questions, really. We don't necessarily with our solutions actually actuate and control anything. 4D monitoring in its name is a monitoring company, but we've built our platforms around open APIs to be able to push data back into properties for utilizing those outputs to better run your building. I'll give you an example. If you took CO2 criteria monitoring within the internals of the building, and Gordon touched on something similar to this earlier. You can actually take a threshold breach, turn that into an activation or alert. For surveying properties, absolutely, yes, we can do that. A lot of what we do is very much desktop audits, and we can review a property based on just scanning through the assets on that property to see which are the big energy consuming assets. But if you got more into the internals of a property and wants to look at tenant occupied areas, that may be more subjected to a survey.
No, thanks, Barry. And obviously we can contact you with that question that's coming from Lee. So thank you for that, Lee. Now, before you go, Gordon, I appreciate you need to go. I'm going to wrap up on this question. As promised, I've been taking questions from the audience throughout, so please don't feel like we've cut question time. These questions have been coming in from the audience and we've weaved them into the panel. And hopefully we've covered predominantly most of the guidance, and I'll do that wrap up. But is innovation in the built environment out of sync with digital innovation, or is innovation in builder management too slow?
I think some parts of the built environment are further forward in that digital journey for sure. I would say if you look at construction, its adoption of BIM's much more extensive. Maybe some of that's down to the mandates I spoke of earlier on. I think if you look at things like banking, the finance sector, the way that it digitally transacts, that's light years ahead of our smart building experience, but lots we can learn, from these maybe more further forward sectors. I think the challenge, as it's always been with FM, is it's so broad. It's not just about a very, thin vertical to digitize, it's a massive horizontal. But in that is the potential for so much, positive change. The operational phase of the built environment contributes 32% of the carbon created on planet Earth. Inside what we're talking about today, I believe a connected, experience-orientated and sustainably focused FM sector can make probably the most impact into that whilst delivering savings. And that's one hell of a call to all of us to make this happen.
Thank you. And I'm going to do rapid fire for John and politely Barry, and this might be a myth buster. Smart building is only for newly built environments. I notice many commercial building in the UK is refurbishment. So I guess it's that retrofit new build debate. Any comments, Barry, John, on that?
Yeah, my point is that, absolutely, if there's a retrofit application being applied, new technologies, whether that be efficient air conditioning systems being applied, but, where we also focus our attention is those properties that aren't under refurbishment, that do have central plant. There are opportunities there to be able to make, immense savings in the first instance. 69% of our applications have seen huge savings. So it's not just for new builds. And on new builds, sometimes we use 4D to actually snag and fault find issues on a new build, new developed technology.
Gordon brought up an interesting stat, which I assume is correct. He seems to know what he's talking about. It's that 70% of the buildings, when we hit the deadline for net zero, are going to be buildings that were built before today. So retrofit is the big opportunity, and I think the most important opportunity in this. So no, smart buildings it's not just for new built stuff.
No, thank you. Now, I have to probably wrap up there, gentlemen, in terms of the questions. Questions that we didn't answer. There isn't that many because, as promised, I'll weave them into our panel. So we try to ensure that the audience felt as interactive with this webinar as much as possible. But I will send those questions on that we unfortunately didn't get answered, and some of them relate to skills, which I know you briefly touched upon, John. Could be a second webinar there, I think, around the skills debate for sure. But I will send those on to the respective panelists and promise the audience we get back to the questions. So at this point, I want to say a massive thank you to Gordon. I appreciate he had to go, but he passed his thanks on to you, the audience, for listening, viewing. John, thank you very much for the support for Elogbooks on the guidance with reference throughout this webinar, as well as your support, Barry, from 4D Monitoring on the guide and today's webinar. So a massive thank you on behalf of IWFM once again. So just a couple of closing slides, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of today's webinar. The guide that's been on the slides on the background, that is available, so please download that. Will look at the areas of definition of smart building, the value of smart buildings, the factors driving smart building adoption. All these areas we've covered to a degree in today's episode: building application, the strategy, how to create one, and the challenges of creating a smart building. All areas we've touched upon, delved a little bit deeper into today, as well as taking questions around. So if we just move on, this is just to highlight where the guides will be found. So the compliance guide was supported by Elogbooks as well, can be found on our good practice guide section on the insight pages of IWFM, along with Content Hub's research reports, good practice guides and guidance notes. So you find all the material there, ladies and gentlemen, for you to read at your leisure. So yeah, just moving on. Yeah, it's come around very quickly. This Monday even, it's the IWFM Impact Awards. This is just to remind people tickets are still available. So please, if interested, please go on the website there to book your ticket for next week. So once again, I just want to say a massive thank you to Gordon, Barry and John, in particular Elogbooks, for supporting us on the guidance that's been referenced throughout today. I think you've learned a lot today from smart buildings. The debate will continue. As I say, there's areas we didn't address today in today's hour episode. As I say, on many of these episodes, they could go on a lot longer than an hour, but as promised, we try and stick to time. But as I say, the conversation doesn't stop here. The guidance doesn't stop here. We will be sending and producing more guidance research around this topic, particularly with our technology SIG and our chair that you heard from today. Just want to remind viewers, there is a survey, little short, after this that will be sent to you, not just to rate today's episode, but actually what you would like to see in future episodes, particularly around this topic. So I've already mentioned skills. Maybe that's an area we need to delve into a bit deeper in terms of future topics. So please complete that. That does help us with the series. We've acted, listened on members, non-members feedback. So please fill in that survey. It does help us a lot. Episode 59, if I get my numbers right, is next week, and that will be advertised on Friday as always. So please look out for that and please register. But once again, thank you to the panelists. Thank you to Elogbooks. And thank you once again, you audience, for joining us for this hour. The recording will be uploaded shortly, so please cascade to colleagues, clients that couldn't make today's episode, as well as remind them of the guidance that we've mentioned numerous times now. But most important of all, take care, and thank you again for joining us on the IWFM webinar. Thank you.
Cheers, Peter.
Thank you.